Hey there, and welcome to Time to Lean, the podcast where you air your dirty laundry and we help you clean up your shit. I'm Crystal Britt.
And I'm Laura Danger. Think of us as your household secret weapon, taking your questions and voicemails to navigate the wild world of gender norms and household dynamics.
We dive headfirst into the nitty-gritty of how broader social issues impact our everyday lives.
So don't be shy, send us your dirty laundry.
And we'll help you clean up your shit.
This is Time to Lean. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Time to Lean. Your questions and stories are what keep us going, so keep those voicemails and messages coming.
Until our next episode, remember that you can always find us on social media and, of course, in your podcast feed. You can also subscribe for $5 a month on Spotify for uninterrupted episodes and bonus content.
We're so grateful for your support. See you next time. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's Laura, solo episode with Laura, and I have a friend today. I have Ellyce. Welcome, Ellyce.
Hi, so excited to be here.
So the quick and dirty is that Ellyce is the author of Keeping Finance Personal and is a queer and neurodivergent financial educator, content creator, and the founder of Queered Co., a financial literacy company. You have a bunch of stuff going on right now. What do you have available? You have all sorts of stuff.
That's literally the story of my life. I feel like perpetually adding on new projects. So yeah, I obviously have my book, Keeping Finance Personal. And then I do have some self-led courses, which are currently being revamped. Those are just little mini courses on like debt, saving money, budgeting, kind of whatever you feel like you need help with. And then the only coaching that I'm currently doing is the Neurospicy Money Method, which is a group coaching program for neurodivergent folks. And we haven't done an intake this year just because of the book launch, but I will be hopefully doing an intake of that in the fall. And then I have my podcast, Dopamine Dollars, which is about, managing your money and your life when you're neurodivergent. And I'm also, this month, the big thing I'm working on is my spreadsheet. So it's called the Dopamine Dollars spreadsheet. It's a budgeting template, and it is very colorful and automated and fun, and the opposite of like every other Excel budgeting spreadsheet you've ever seen. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, that kind of takes me into what I wanted to talk to you about. Because there is so much boring stuff out there, and all of the advice, like the standard advice that is given out financially, is so sterile and boiled down. And I know, at least for me, hasn't worked. Like I just like don't see myself in it at all. And I mean, from my perspective, that's why your work is so fantastic and important. But what do they get wrong? What do these like big time names that we might all recognize, like what do they get wrong?
So much. So I feel like pretty much everything. I feel like the big thing is that it's so, like you said, sterile and focused on the numbers. Like it's very math based. And like if you're talking to someone about creating a budget or, budgeting out their income for the month, it's literally just let's crunch the numbers and figure out how you can save more money and pay off more debt and invest more for retirement. And this is how much money a month you should put away if you want to retire with this much money. Like it's all just based on that. And so many of the popular, like old school financial experts just forget about, or maybe not even forget, they just fail to mention how who you are and your identity plays such a big role in your money. Like, to me, it's the equivalent of someone trying to give you a workout plan and saying, this is the ultimate workout, like CrossFit or whatever is the workout that everyone should do. It's the best workout ever. And if you want to have, if you want to be strong and have the body that you want, you should do CrossFit, and like just prescribing it to everyone. That's kind of what's happening in the finance industry. But we know with like fitness that doesn't make sense. Everyone has very different needs. Some people want to do yoga. Some people want to run a marathon. Some people want to do weightlifting. And it really depends on like what your personal goals are and, your own ability and all of these things. So I think that's one of the big things. I think another thing is that interestingly, even though they're ignoring the person, they're also blaming the individual for their financial problems. So I think that's a huge one where I personally believe that so many people's financial challenges are just symptoms of like generational trauma and like larger societal issues that exist rather than just an individual making, you know, quote unquote, poor decisions. So that's another big thing, is that the blame is often placed on the individual. Like, it's your fault that you're in debt. You made bad decisions. You're bad with money, that kind of thing. Instead of talking about, you know, this mental health support and the cost of healthcare and the cost of living and inflation and like all of these other things that play a bigger role, in my opinion. And yeah, there's honestly so many. They're very shameful and restrictive, which just work against everything you're trying to do. If you feel shameful about your financial situation, it's going to hold you back from asking for help, asking questions, like even wanting to look at it and address it. And I think that that kind of shame-based motivation just, you know, it only can work for a tiny bit. Maybe it spurs you on to take one action, but it's not going to be sustainable over time, because you're just going to be tired of feeling so bad like every time you open up, you know, your bank account and things like that. And then another one I would say is that I kind of touched on this, but it's the promotion of like there's a right way and there's like a one path to success that we should all be following. But I could continue on for this for an hour, because there's like so much.
I feel like all of that, like, you know, I was reading your book, which is fantastic. And like so much of the messaging that you talk about in it resonated so much with me. A lot of like, you know, you talk about mental health, you talk about identity and how there's personal identity and was it social identity? Like,
yeah,
what is the difference there?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways that people describe identity, and I kind of was looking for what I felt like was an easy to grasp definition of it. And for me, that one made the most sense. So it's separating out personal and social identity, which in reality, you know, your identities are all intertwined. But personal identity would be the aspects of yourself that kind of make up your personality and who you are. So it could be like your job, maybe you're a nurse, maybe you're a dog mom, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're an artist, you're creative, those kind of like aspects of your personality and who you are, your values, political beliefs, things like that. And then your social identity is aspects of your identity that are not only how you see and perceive yourself, but also how the world sees and perceives you. So it's more so those pieces of identity that you're born with and that kind of put you into certain like groups, for lack of a better word. But things like race and gender, your socioeconomic status, if you have a disability or neurodivergence, like those types of things would fall under your social identity.
Yeah, I really liked how you also, you know, you talk about intersectionality, you talk about the ways that, you know, there's a difference between having an invisible disability or one that is being perceived a certain, like different perceptions impact differently. It's a very complex topic, and I appreciate that you really like investigated it and dug into it. Because like I grew up with the advice of like have your envelopes and put your cash in the envelopes and pay no debt ever. Don't ever have debt. And personally, what I think is so unique about your voice and viewpoint is this personalized aspect to it. And I think that people who listen to this podcast are often trying to figure out, like they're coming here asking like, how for me, like, how do I, this whole big thing of the world of society and all of it is like not quite working for me. And the way that is normal is not quite working. And so coming to it with individuality is so great. So I just want to point out one thing that stuck out to me. Your approach to what is like the value that you spend. So I get coffee every morning and I pay for it, even though I have a coffee maker at home. Like I do that every day. And for me, that has an intense amount of value because it, like, having a routine, moving my body every day and having a routine is an incredibly stabilizing action in my life. Like, it is a grounding point to walk to the cafe, get a coffee, and come home every single day.
Mhm.
Like, it, and if I can't do that, it's so disorienting. I can't, like, my day's done. It's toast. I'm totally, like, I can't function. And so to
Yeah.
me, that $4 every single day is like a cost I want to spend. So, like, because you sort of talk about that, could you elaborate on that concept?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you were to tell the story that you just told me, or even not even tell the story, but just show your spending to one of those traditional financial experts, they would just immediately say, cut out your morning coffee. Like, that's such an easy swap. Like, $4 a day, you're saving $4 a day. Like, easy. Like, that's an immediate thing that they would point out. But you just described why it's so important and like the benefit that it has on your life and your like mindset for the day and just your regulation of your nervous system. Like, it is so important. And that's something that, you know, is missing from a lot of these conversations. It's just like, it doesn't really, it's almost like we don't care what's important to you, just do what's best in terms of numbers. But I think that is like ignoring a lot of nuance, because I would argue that you probably can, you know, do more work in your business, show up more for your family, like probably be more creative, like all of these things with that extra $4 a day that could maybe potentially lead to more income down the line. Whereas like if you don't have that, that could be impacting, you know, how you're showing up in your business, and therefore you're making less money. So like I think there's like a lot of nuance to it. But basically what you're touching on is this idea of values-based spending, and really taking a look at what are the things that are like, what are my core personal values? What are the things that are really important to me? And also, what are the tools or accommodations in my life that are having a different kind of return on investment? Like maybe giving you more time, giving you more energy, like things like that, that are worth it to me to spend money on. And I think when you're really clear on those things, it makes it a lot easier when you're looking at your finances to kind of do an audit of, okay, is this a purchase that I feel good about? Is this money that I'm putting towards these things? Like, do I feel like this aligns with my values? Do I feel like it aligns with who I am and like what's important to me, and also the return on investment that this thing gives me? And kind of like be able to go through that and audit the way you're spending your money and see if it aligns. Because I know for me in the past, I mentioned this in the book, when I was in university, I used to spend a lot of money on like going out with my friends and like drinking and getting fast food and taking Ubers, and you know, nothing wrong with any of those expenses, but for me, I was lonely and needing connection, and that was like the way that I was like trying to connect. But I was just spending so much money on these things that really didn't actually feel good and weren't like the root of what I needed. And so that was like for me, just looking through my spending, looking through my credit card statement, with the lens of like what's important to me, what do I value? I was like, oh, these are not aligned. And that was really helpful for me to kind of see, because it's so easy to get just wrapped up in your day-to-day life on autopilot and like not really realize like why you're buying things, and you know, yeah, the different reasons kind of behind it. And touching on identity like we did before, there's something that I mentioned in the book, which is a lot of times we will spend money in order to belong, or in order to like attempt to escape our identity, which if we're talking social identity, you can't really escape it. Like you're born with it. Like, but we might spend money in an attempt to like present a different version of ourselves to the outside world, or to like belong with a certain group of people. In my case, it was like this university group of friends I wanted to belong. So I was like spending money on, you know, going out and doing things that I didn't really actually want to do. So that also plays a big role. And so understanding like that identity piece and also what you value can really help you when looking through your spending and just like adjusting your spending.
I feel like that's such a great exercise. And you walk through like the details in the book, which if anyone's interested can go check out. There's like, you've got really great homework in there. But I thought that was a really interesting reframe, because yeah, thinking about like, I will happily spend money taking my friends out to dinner. If I've got the money, like, and I'm going to want it to be a fun place and I want no one to worry about it. And like, I will gladly do that. Where, but I don't want to spend that much money on like clothes.
Mm-hmm.
However, like, it's just really interesting to look at what I might have spent on something a while ago to like pick up friends. I'm using air quotes here, but like to catch friends, to catch a certain kind of friend, to attract a certain kind. And I might have spent money presenting in a certain way that was inauthentic. And I'll happily spend that amount of money now doing something that is more authentic. It's the same amount of money put in different places. But I loved that suggestion of like, your budget could be the same, but you might use it more effectively if you think about if you're using it to express yourself authentically versus, or like doing things you actually are rooted in your values or not. Like, that's such a nice reframe, a nice approach.
Yeah, exactly. You just touched on it, like the idea of it doesn't actually have to be less money that you're spending. It's how aligned is that spending. And I think if you're ending the end of the month feeling very guilty about how you spent your money, it might be that a lot of your spending is not actually like aligned with your values and who you are. And there might be some like kind of almost like masking of your spending going on. And that would be something to kind of look into, because being more aligned with how you're using your money can help alleviate some of that guilt.
That comes to one of the questions that I get a lot. And actually someone messaged me just the other day about that, is like, when two or more people are trying to share a budget and like the way that your relationship was with money growing up might be totally different than theirs. Like even two people who grew up with similar like socioeconomic, financial, all of that, have different responses, like money hoarding versus like spending it all, like that happens all the time. How do you take inventory and then grapple with that being in a relationship with someone else?
Yeah. To your point, I just want to say, like, my sister and I grew up in the exact same household. Like, my parents are still together. We grew up in a 2-parent household. We have complete opposite money habits. So you're so spot on that this can happen no matter how you grew up. And you can have trauma no matter like what socioeconomic status you're in. You could have the most wonderful childhood. You could grow up very wealthy and have everything you've ever wanted and still have money trauma. And similarly, you could grow up in a low income household and have, maybe less money trauma. It doesn't discriminate how it shows up. It can be really everyone. So in a relationship, it's definitely challenging, because I think there is maybe a lot of people maybe approach it thinking that other people are thinking the same way they are, and that they would make the same decisions that they would, especially in a relationship, because it's not just like a random person or an acquaintance. It's someone that you love and you trust, and you feel like you're on the same page with a lot of things. So you maybe assume, oh, they're going to want to, spend extra money we have on the same things. They're going to want the same financial goals. So the biggest thing, which I feel like everyone hates to hear, but communication is like the number one thing, is actually having intentional conversations about money. And I recognize that this is in itself a very scary thing to do for a lot of people, and just, can bring up a lot of shame and be very hard to get through. So my suggestion in that case, if you are someone who is like very nervous about talking about money, is to start talking about money in a very fun, lighthearted way. So maybe it's not even talking about your money at all. Maybe it's talking about a situation that's happening like in pop culture, or like my favorite TV show is Friends. And I always point out, like, they talk about money quite a bit in the episodes. Like, there's one quite early on where a lot of the friend group brings up that they make less money than the other half of the friend group, and that it's hard to do all these activities that they want to do. So like even things like that, you could bring up something that you're seeing on TV or that is in the news and be like, oh, what do you think about this? Just to kind of open up the conversation. And then when you're kind of moving into your own situation and you're still feeling kind of uneasy, I would suggest talking about the more exciting parts. Like for my partner and I, she had a lot of financial trauma. And so when we were first talking about it, it was really emotional for her. So we said, okay, let's talk about like our savings goals and like where we want to like travel to in the future, or like where we want to like the fun stuff that feels enjoyable to talk about, rather than like talking about the debt or like, you know, stuff like that. So that's where I'd recommend starting. And then I would also say it's very important for both of you individually to understand your own money story. Basically, your money story is like your thoughts and beliefs and narratives around money that is largely formed from like your childhood, your lived experience, your identity. So understanding essentially like why you are the way you are, like why do you think this way about money and where did that come from? And if you both understand that individually, then you are able to communicate that to each other and really see where there are differences and where things don't line up. And that can be really helpful as well for understanding why someone might think differently than you, because you might be like, this is the way to do things. Like, why would anyone ever think differently? And then understanding like where that belief came from for them, I think can lead to more like compassion and help you kind of navigate that better. But I will also say a little bit of a hard truth, which is sometimes there are just differences that you can't overcome and you're just not a money match. And I think that's a really hard thing to grapple with, especially if you're deeper into a relationship. But finances are so interwoven into everything that we do. And it impacts like if you ever want to have children, if you want to get married, if you, want to move somewhere, if you want to own a home, if you want to travel, if you like all of those big decisions impact money. Also your day-to-day life and like how you spend your money, like so many things. And so if there's big differences that you just cannot reconcile, that is going to be a tension point in your relationship forever. Like that's just something also to really examine and see if it's something you can work through or not.
That's so yeah, my husband and I watch a lot of 90 Day Fiance, and it's always like they're always having money conversations, and like because being traveling between different countries or moving means that they have to talk about who can work and who can't. And these conversations are always fascinating to have. Also, I've been with my husband since we were very young. So like every debt and accumulation of wealth has come as a team, like together. We've always both worked. And so we were just recently like talking about how we haven't we've kind of avoided those conversations. We haven't had to be having these conversations. And I think that a lot of people who follow or who listens or Crystal or who listen to the podcast sometimes have been a stay-at-home parent for 15 years or stepped away from a career, or they stayed home while their partner went to college and built something. I talked to someone whose partner was being paid like into a trust, and she had no access to any of their money. Basically, they were getting paid enough to get by for the month, and everything had to be approved. She had no access to any of it. And like anytime she brought the conversation up, it went poorly. So have you talked to anybody like that as you were going through the process of writing this book, where it was like really alarming? Or I'm saying alarming, maybe I'm making a judgment, but that was my reaction when I heard that. I was like, oh no, that's scary.
Yeah. What's actually interesting is I do include some couple interviews and also one polyamorous triad in the book. And I did more interviews than was included, like a lot more interviews that weren't included. And there was this actual like overarching theme of, in the heterosexual relationships, the woman was almost always experiencing some sort of like, basically the man in the relationship was exerting power over her with money. And it was alarming to me because I was getting these couples who seemed like very self-aware and were, followed my content and were very much like having open money conversations, but there was still things with like gender roles and I don't know, just like, I think there's also this thing where if one person in the relationship feels like they're quote unquote like bad with money, they might automatically be like, well, you can just handle it to the other person without like understanding their money story and how they might view things. And so that person then is making decisions basically based on their money story and like their narrative and what they think is the right way to use that money, but it might not align with what you want. And they might not even actually be, you know, better equipped to manage money than you are, but just because you were kind of like, oh, I don't want to do it like you do it, then, you know, it leads to this kind of unhealthy dynamic. So I was very shocked by that. And I think another thing was the domestic work and domestic labor was also a really big thing that I mentioned in the book. Like, that should be part of the conversation. Like, all these things should be together, like they're intertwined. Like, when you're talking about money, it should also be like talking about domestic labor, talking about you know, how you're going to split expenses. Like, what does an equitable split look like? It includes so much more than just money. And I think a lot of people aren't factoring that into the conversation either. So yeah, there's a lot of difficult dynamics out there. And I think anytime you have any sort of big differences too with identity, like if you have a partner who's neurotypical and one who's neurodivergent, or a partner who's disabled and one who isn't, and you know, that leads to a lot of additional challenges to navigate, because I think it's easy in those situations for one partner to be taken advantage of, even like unknowingly. I would say most of the case it is unknowingly. It's not necessarily the other partner is maliciously trying to do that, but it's just the dynamic that happens because, you know, one person is more marginalized, and that kind of automatically lends to that dynamic. So yeah, it is very common and it's unfortunate. And I think that open communication can help a lot, the more that we have conversations with each other, but also outside of the relationship as well. I think, you know, just talking about money more in general, being able to talk about it with your friends and like your family if you want to, and other people, so that you can kind of get some context as to what are other people dealing with, how are they navigating these things. And I think then, you know, people can also point things out to you like, I don't know if that is like the best for you, or maybe like, how do you feel about that? Or like, because you kind of get in this bubble of your relationship, and a lot of those things you never share publicly. And so then you're in your own like echo chamber where you're not really getting any sort of outside input into what that dynamic might actually look like.
Yeah, I feel like it's so interesting. Like I was raised with brothers, and I got a different financial education than they did within the same home. And I think I ended up like, yeah, like Googling or like looking for advice online to help me out. And it's fun, like it's just funny in retrospect to be like, oh, I found the same crap, like the same mainstream crap that didn't fit who I was. But it wasn't until much later that I was talking to friends about money. Like literally 2 weeks ago, Crystal and I were talking about credit cards. And I realized like I just inherited a certain way of doing credit cards. And like, you know, I have never talked to anybody else except my parents and my husband about how to do credit cards. And he didn't have one before me. So like, he got it from me.
Yeah.
So pretty limited view if you think about it. And I hadn't really put that together. Like I do have the ability to exert a little bit of power because like he's trusting me with a lot. If I'm coming to the table with like opinions on how to do things, and he's like, I don't know, like, you know better than I do, I think. That's not that's not necessarily the best setup. Maybe I need to
Yeah.
like log off and talk to him about it.
I think you made such a good point. It is like just even just stopping to question, why are we doing this? And is this most supportive to both of us? Like, is this the best option for us? Is the way that we're using our credit card the best? Is the way that our account organization is working? How we're saving, how we're divvying up expenses? Like, just asking why, because it's so easy for us to just slip into those, this is what my parents did, or this is what I was taught, so I'm just going to do this, and nobody questions it. But even if it isn't like a, I don't know, quote unquote bad way to do something, it might not be the best for you as like in your relationship. It might not be the most supportive for what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's like a good lesson just across the board for everyone, is like when you're sitting down to examine your finances and how they kind of fit into your life and how they support your needs, it's stopping to ask, why am I doing this? And like, what could I be doing it differently in a way that works better for me?
Yeah, something that I found very interesting personally, it's in like the early part of your book, is about mental health. So I have ADHD and bipolar 2, which I didn't realize like both of those things have had an impact on my spending over the years. Like I can be very impulsive and very I don't think through like a massive purchase and then I'm like, oh no, that was a bad idea. Um and then yeah, it's like embarrassing, or I have felt embarrassed about that. I have felt ashamed of myself for that. But it was something actually in an interview with Alyssa Davies that you include, where she talks about how she sometimes reacts by buying something like to control a situation. So the thing that stuck out to me I hadn't thought about was like, she's like, I'll pay $35 for parking because the idea of having to find a parking spot and like navigate my way around a space is so overwhelming that I will spend money that. And I liked hearing somebody else say that because it's not that that's wrong. Like maybe it is appropriate to spend $35 because like then you can enjoy the show that you're trying to go to.
Yeah.
Or if you don't for me, if I don't spend the $35, I won't go. I will opt fully out of the entire experience. So like, but also would there be a better way to do it? Like paying attention to that. I say all of that because I am an overthinker and I will think through that. And I think that people who listen to this podcast might think through that. What do you do if you have someone in your life who isn't processing this stuff? Like if you're cool looking through, and I'm like blindsiding you with this question, but
That's all
like,
good.
what could you do if the people in your life aren't doing the same reflecting?
So you mean like you've done the reflection work to kind of understand why you're spending on certain things and like how that is connected to your mental health, but other people around you are not doing that. Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is a tough one. It depends on, I guess, the context and like the relationship with the person around you, whether it's like a romantic partner, friend, family. I think one of the biggest things is telling and like sharing your experience and really explaining to them why it affects you the way it does and like the process that your brain goes through. Maybe for me, I have ADHD and self-diagnosed autism, and both my parents are definitely neurodivergent. My mom did get diagnosed with ADHD, and my dad is 100% like textbook definition of autism, but will never get diagnosed probably. But I was like the first in my family to ever examine that and to get diagnosed. And so a lot of times, like it's gotten a lot better now that it's been a few years, but I, for the first little while, had to over explain almost everything because, you know, I grew up in this household where all of these neurodivergent traits were seen as like completely like normal for, I hate using that word, but we're seen as normal because my parents are neurodivergent. So they're like, yeah, we do that. So obviously, you know, you're doing that. That's not strange. So then I had to actually be like, do you know that other people don't experience this? Like, do you know that it like doesn't have to be this way? And really having to explain like, this is not just the way that everyone's brain works. Like, this is actually like debilitating. And like, this is how I experience things. And I think it's really challenging to be in that spot, to have to always kind of explain yourself or to spend a lot of time being misunderstood or feeling like people are kind of writing off how you're feeling. But if it's an important relationship to you, I do think that it pays off. And I think that it has like really paid off in my life in terms of my friends and my family, because now there's a lot of things that they kind of know now and that they will recognize like maybe why I'm doing something. Or even in the case of my parents' relationship, I've been educating my mom a lot about autism because I'm like, my dad's autistic, and they clash heads in some instances because I'm pretty sure that my dad has like the PDA profile, which can be really difficult when like my mom is like, hey, can you do this thing around the house? So I've been trying to explain to her like, here's alternative ways to kind of do it, and like it's not that he doesn't want to do it, it's just like it's fight or flight in his brain. And so that has also been helping their relationship, just like she's able to kind of navigate that a little bit better. So I think that's one piece. But I also think on the other hand that if it is someone that you like is really close to you and an important part of your life, I think it is also on them to do some of that work as well. And maybe even more on them. This is like the whole emotional labor conversation. I think like, especially in a romantic relationship, if you don't understand something about your partner, that is something that you could go and find out at least some of it by going online or reading books or, you know, things like that. I think that it's on you to do that work. Obviously, there's some things you can't find, like speaking about your actual experience with things. And, you know, not everyone who has ADHD experiences it the same. Not everyone who has bipolar experiences it the same. So, you know, you need some of that actual lived experience. But I think it should be also on the people in your life to do that work, to understand like, oh, how does ADHD impact money? How does bipolar impact your money? How does this disability impact your life? And things like that.
Given that, I'm like, as you're talking, I'm kind of connecting the dots between those maybe stay-at-home parents or someone who was doing more domestic labor and less earning, or something like that, where they find themselves really questioning their financial situation. Or maybe like, I think there is a lot of shame that happens there too, where it's like, well, I'm not an earner, so I need to compensate. I need to like compensate or make up for it in other ways. And maybe they're listening to this, maybe they're learning about themselves, or they read your book or whatever, and they're assessing things. They don't know if their partner's going to be on board, but they really want to get themselves like on a new path forward. Do you have any like first steps even to get your brain right, or like a solid foundation there? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in terms of mindset, the whole like money story thing that I mentioned is like an important first step in terms of like just understanding your own beliefs and maybe where that feeling of like feeling like you need to compensate, like where is that coming from, or like what are your feelings and attitudes towards your partner, or like that situation. I think understanding that is important. I think another thing that I would suggest, which is something that I learned from taking the trauma of money certification program, is asking yourself the question, whose shame is this? And this is just kind of a helpful way to basically, you're thinking about, is this my shame to carry, or is this solely my shame to carry? I'm feeling shameful about these things, but how many of the challenges that I faced or these situations are actually brought on from other things? Like in the case of domestic labor, I would argue that a lot of that shame is like the patriarchy and capitalism. And like, you know, it's not solely your shame to carry. So not that this is going to remove the shame that you feel, but I think it's a helpful reframe to acknowledge maybe only a tiny little part of this is actually my shame, and the rest of it is like shame being imposed on me that I'm now carrying on my back, but I don't need to be. So that for me was really helpful for kind of like releasing some of the things I was carrying that were completely out of my control and that were larger like societal things. And then in terms of like a tangible step, I always recommend that people have individual emergency funds. Even if you also have a joint one, I think no matter what your circumstance, situation, doesn't matter. I think you should always have an individual emergency fund, because you just literally never know. And it's not even an instance of like, of course, there's the obvious, like you could break up, but also it could be a situation where maybe your partner is in the hospital or something, and they, you know, you need access to money right away. You would have your own emergency fund. You wouldn't have to worry about like figuring out anything with someone else. So you just be like, oh, I got money right away. I can use that. So I would say that is like a very important thing. And if you're in a situation where you're like, I want to change what's happening in my relationship right now, but I don't know if my partner's going to be on board. I think having that financial protection so that you do have the ability to leave if you want to leave, you have that choice, that is really helpful for also, I think, even just empowering you going into that conversation, because there's that extra power dynamic added if you cannot leave, like if you financially cannot afford to leave, even if the relationship were to fall apart. So I think that would make that, like, approaching that situation so much scarier. So if you have that like financial backing, you can maybe feel more confident going into that.
Yeah, it is such a tricky thing because, okay, people talk, I hear a lot of people talking about this on social media, and they're like, just get a post nut. Or they're like, if your partner is the breadwinner, why would they have a hard time with you having your own money? Like, if they think, it's really easy to just be like, well, ask them for, if you're relying on someone financially, well, just open another account or whatever. Ideally, right? That comes wrapped in like, ideally. Yeah, great. But maybe you have talked about or thought about this or talk about it. But I know that I have heard about, like, honestly, like scrolling away funds, like doing it. You don't have to tell the person that you are married to that you are doing this if you don't feel comfortable bringing it up. To your point, you never know. And the idea that you might feel like there's going to be a backlash to talking about having your own access to money, if that brings up, if you feel nervous about that, I mean, my personal reaction is like, that's a good enough indication that you should probably have access to your own money if you feel weird about bringing it up. Do you have, again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but have you thought about things like that? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, if you are someone who is working, like, probably the easiest way is to get a portion of your paycheck funneled into like a high yield savings account that your partner doesn't know about. So a lot of workplaces allow you to submit multiple direct deposit information. And so you can just say, I want $50 of each paycheck to go into this. And if, depending on how worried you are about your partner finding out, you could do a lower amount or something that is like less noticeable. And that's like a way that, I mean, hopefully they're not looking at your pay stubs closely, but that would be like one option. Another one, which I think, again, it depends on the dynamic, but if you take out cash and you can say like, oh, I was at a place that only took cash, like I bought something at a garage sale or something like that. If you take out cash from ATM and then you squirrel some of that or all of that away, that would be like another way that is maybe flies under the radar a bit more. But I very much recognize that there are some dynamics where this would be very, very challenging and probably a scary thing in itself to even try to initiate. I would also recommend in that instance, like, if you feel comfortable telling somebody that you trust in your life, that maybe they open an account for you under their name or something like that, where maybe you can e-transfer them money for something. Like, maybe it's like, oh, I went out for dinner with this person, and so I'm just e-transferring them the money, but that's actually going into your account. Like, I think if you have someone else that knows what's going on and maybe can help you make that a little more inconspicuous, that's also helpful to know that there's someone on your side and someone that can also kind of protect you in a way.
Yeah, I love that advice. The thing about the paychecks is very interesting. And I mean, like, the other piece that you talk about is just like getting to know your goals and like thinking about it and how you feel about it, and financial education, right? Just like knowing what's going on. I mean, going back to just feeling kind of nervous or unskilled at it, passing it off is, it sets up a dynamic of like, it embeds inequity in there. It's a kind of risky thing to do. I love the idea of just being like, hey, can you sit me down and tell me what is going on? Like, can I see the bank accounts? What is going on here? Why do we save this amount, that amount? That's such a great opportunity for people.
Yeah. And actually, the first chapter in the book is about safe spaces, because I felt like this was so important to address right at the beginning. And I think what you just said kind of sparked the idea in my mind that you could actually really apply this to relationships as well. So like in the first chapter, I talk about the importance of finding safe spaces to learn about money, because if you don't feel safe in that space, you're not going to want to open up about your situation, and you're not going to feel safe to ask questions. So I have this exercise where you kind of write out your red and green flags of things to look for. And I actually think this would be amazing to do in a relationship sense as well. Because if you're feeling like it's not safe enough for you to ask why we're doing something, like that's a red flag. And that's something to like at least be aware of and like have a plan to address. And yeah, I think that would be kind of an important thing to just gauge. Like, do I feel like this is a safe space in my relationship? Like, do I feel safe enough to ask this? And if I don't, what needs to change? And sometimes it happens unknowingly, right? Like, it's, you know, it might not be abusive situation. It just might be that there was a lack of communication, or that one person is really taking charge and maybe unknowingly being a little condescending or talking down a bit, which makes you feel like, oh, I don't want to ask because they just know better than me. So I think that would be a good thing to examine as well.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, we could talk for hours. Where can people find you? If they want to start learning about this stuff, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at ellyce.fulmore, and then TikTok at queered.co. And then my website is just queeredco.com. You can learn more about me and QueeredCo and see like the programs that I have. I also have a lot of freebies on there. So there's a free spending tracker, a free financial audit. So if you want a place to start with your money, those are some downloads you could try. And then my podcast is called Dopamine Dollars, wherever you listen to podcasts. And then my book, Keeping Finance Personal, is available in ebook, audiobook, and hardcover. And if you go to queeredco.com/book, I have like all the different links for whatever format you want. And I also have like some international links and some like independent bookstore links. So pretty much like wherever you want to buy it from, they'll all be linked there. So that would be a good place to go.
Okay, awesome. I so appreciate you coming. I know everybody who's listening does too. And we'll see you online.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey there, and welcome to Time to Lean, the podcast where you air your dirty laundry and we help you clean up your shit. I'm Crystal Britt.
And I'm Laura Danger. Think of us as your household secret weapon, taking your questions and voicemails to navigate the wild world of gender norms and household dynamics.
We dive headfirst into the nitty-gritty of how broader social issues impact our everyday lives.
So don't be shy. Send us your dirty laundry.
And we'll help you clean up your shit.
This is Time to Lean. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Time to Lean. Your questions and stories are what keep us going, so keep those voicemails and messages coming.
Until our next episode, remember that you can always find us on social media and, of course, in your podcast feed. You can also subscribe for $5 a month on Spotify for uninterrupted episodes and bonus content.
We're so grateful for your support. See you next time.